Hello, everybody, and welcome to Nintendo Week for the end of week of March 11th through 17th. I'm your host, Colin McIsaac, and as always, I'm joined by Alex Plant.
Amnesia exclusive.
And Ben Lemoreau.
Hey.
This week marks our biggest episode yet, and for two reasons. One is that Nintendo dropped a bombshell on us this morning. Well, I guess if you're listening to this, it's Tuesday morning, by announcing their plans to release mobile games, as well as an official announcement of their next-gen hardware, currently codenamed NX. There's so much to talk about here that's going to be this week's discussion segment, so we're going to talk about other news for a little while and then dig really deep into this, because there's really a ton to talk about. The second reason is that for the first time, we're going to have a third block in this week's show. So after we talk about news and discuss Nintendo's recent announcements, we're going to be answering your questions. We asked Amnesia fans to ask the three of us anything and everything about Nintendo. So there's going to be some serious stuff, some wacky stuff. It's going to be a lot of fun. So with that all said, let's jump in! Playtonic Games officially unveiled Project Ukulele on Saturday, the spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie. It's a 3D platformer, vibrant worlds, kooky characters. So basically, it's now been confirmed that it's everything we were expecting, but on a surprising new scale. It's going to be non-linear, unlike the Banjo games, and as you gather more collectibles, not only will you unlock new worlds, but the worlds that you've already explored will grow even bigger, so there will be more new space. They're already planning like a ton of characters and worlds who they'll later spin off to star in their own games. So you can think of that kind of like how Banjo and Conker were in Diddy Kong Racing, and then Tip Top from that game was then in Banjo, etc. But most importantly, they really want fan feedback to drive the game. They're setting up forums, they're launching a Kickstarter, they really want you to make your voice heard on every aspect of the game. Playtonic specifically says, "We want you guys to just tell us and engage with us, and we'll try and make it happen. It's entirely up to what you guys want to see us do."
Yeah, so I'm glad they announced it. And I don't know if this is just me, but judging from the screenshots so far, the vibes I'm getting are less Banjo and more kind of Sonic or Spyro.
Really?
Just kind of based on the artwork.
Oh, I'm kind of getting like an updated Banjo vibe.
If you look at the geometry of things, it feels very Sonic-like.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just an aesthetic thing, but it's sort of weird to see that direction given the quality of the recent modern Sonic games. So I'm hoping it's aligned with Banjo more than with Sonic, but I'm a little worried.
So do you think that Playtonic should develop the next Sonic game because Sega's incapable of doing it?
Well, it's more that I'm...
No, I kid.
It's more that I'm concerned about anything that resembles modern Sonic in any way whatsoever.
Well, for me, everything...
So I'm just a little nervous.
Everything they've said so far sounds great on paper, but when it comes to like these rare type games, there's basically two things that to me are the most important, and that's the atmosphere of the game, like the goofy characters and the fun dialogue and things like that, and then how the gameplay handles. And we haven't seen either of these things. They've promised interesting characters, and I have no doubt that they'll deliver. But I can't really form an opinion on a game that's really based on 3D platform and memorable characters, and we haven't really been introduced to any of the characters yet or seen any of the gameplay.
Yeah, honestly, I am with you on that. I feel like some of their characters are very, not generic, but they're just not quite lovable in the same way that like the Donkey Kong Country cast was, that like the Banjo cast was.
We'll need to see more of them in
like
action before we can figure it out, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Although right now, I do feel like they're kind of like the side characters from Diddy Kong Racing instead of like, the stars like Banjo, like Diddy Kong, like some of those characters were.
And then, with them saying it's going to be non-linear, that's where it's going to be interesting to see how this gameplay unfolds, because this is going to be a little different than what they've seen before, which is good, because I don't think you can just bank on nostalgia. You have to bring some new things to the table. But until we see how this plays out, this Banjo-style game, but with a non-linear world, it's hard to make judgments at this point. I'm cautiously optimistic and really excited to see what they come up with, but just from what they've shown so far, it's not enough for me to be, super hyped for this game.
I completely understand where you're coming from. With Rareware, we've seen, like, two kinds of Rare. We've seen, like, Donkey Kong Country, Banjo-Kazooie, Viva Pinata rare, and then we've seen Grabbed by the Ghoulies rare. And those are the same people. Grabbed by the Ghoulies was made like early in the Xbox's life cycle when Microsoft like first acquired them. So they do have their hits and they have their misses. And while it is all well and good and really exciting to think that this is going to be a real return to form for Banjo-Kazooie, even if it's not the Banjo-Kazooie series, it is also, I don't want to get my hopes too high just to have them dashed in case it's something really more like Grabbed by the Ghoulies.
Well, I would say the great thing about this news is even if the game turns out badly, it's great that they're actually revisiting this old style of game that's basically died out at this point.
Right, because we've seen like indie developers like with A Hat in Time kind of try to recapture this magic. But I think it's really encouraging and really exciting to see that the people who really made this good and made this popular to begin with are giving it another go.
Yeah, exactly.
So the reason we're talking about this in a Nintendo podcast, you may be wondering that, I think it's fair to say that Banjo-Kazooie and Rare is really embedded in Nintendo culture and the Nintendo fandom. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of Nintendo fans, really consider Banjo-Kazooie to be a part of that, to be a part of this whole culture almost. So a lot of Nintendo fans are getting really excited about this. And Playtonic themselves seem to be really focused on Nintendo. They're talking a lot about bringing it to Wii U. The only console that they mentioned by name in this whole presentation was Wii U. Though they did say they would bring it to other consoles, depending on fan demand. But they talked about maybe even having like an amiibo line. So they're clearly really, really wedded to Nintendo. That's a bad choice of words, but they clearly really like Nintendo and really want to work with them.
I'd ship it.
So Sega and Game Freak are working together on a brand new game called Tembo the Badass Elephant. It's kind of funny hearing a game that has the word badass in the name from the same people who make Pokemon. But it's a platformer starring a commando elephant named Tembo. You can check out the trailer at GameNesia.com if you're interested. The thing about this game, though, that has people talking is even though it's made by Game Freak, it's not coming to Nintendo platforms. It's coming to Steam, Xbox One, and PlayStation 4. No Wii U, no 3DS. So...
Yeah, and Sega and Game Freak are both companies that have had great relationships with Nintendo. Obviously, Sega has put all of the recent Sonic games on Wii U and 3DS, and Game Freak works almost exclusively with Nintendo.
Yeah, I didn't realize that Game Freak wasn't even owned by Nintendo at this point.
Right, they just have a deal when it comes to the Pokemon series,
that
it's console exclusive to Nintendo, but... Yeah, so it's very strange to see them working on a non-Nintendo game. I would say maybe the two factors that made them choose that is obviously poor sales of Wii U is, one factor. Xbox One and PS4 have both outsold it already, even though they've been on the market less. And then also, it's possible that they just didn't think a game called Tembo the Badass sell particularly well on a Nintendo platform.
Yeah.
Not too many moms are going to buy their kid Tembo the Badass Elephant.
It's funny because if you look at the game, it looks like a game that would do okay on Wii U.
Yeah, it looks like a game, honestly, I think that would do better on Wii U and 3DS than on the other platforms, especially than PS4 by Sega and Game Freak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then, throw badass in the name and it turns off
Well,
the
I mean, they could have easily called it Tembo the Elephant Commando.
Yeah.
I mean it's not
true,
hard to...
But it's obviously not their vision, and if there's anything developers are about these days, it's about their vision.
I'm just imagining a director putting his foot down and saying, if I don't get to call it Tembo the Badass Elephant, then I'm not making it.
Nuh-uh. You can't
Maybe
have
the director is Tembo the Badass Elephant.
Plot
He's making
twist.
it about
Jinx.
himself.
So, a few weeks ago, we talked about the giant Majora eyes in the bosses on Majora's Mask, and our Nomo recently explained a little bit behind that. So he talks a lot about the pacing of the game and where players might slow down when you don't want them to. And sure enough, that is really important to consider, especially when your game has a 3-day time limit, like Majora's Mask does. So he says that this happens anytime the difficulty of the game peaks. That's something we decided to pay very close attention to. For example, even in boss fights, if you don't make the weak point of the boss clear enough, people are going to go through the boss fight several times. They might just stop and look up how to beat the boss. Anytime that happens, you're losing tempo in the game. So, hearing this, I can better understand like where he and the dev team are coming from when they put these giant eyes there. But I still stand by what we said last time we talked about this. That they could have come to a more creative or at least a more subtle solution, and one that better fits the aesthetics of the bosses themselves than just having these eyes that are just ripped straight from Majora. Not even made for these bosses, but just taken from Majora and slapped onto these characters.
Yeah, setting aside the eyes themselves, every time Aonuma opens his mouth about a subject like this, I think of his comments when he said he couldn't beat the original Legend of Zelda because he couldn't get past the Octoroks. So when I hear him say things like this, it's alarming to me. Yes, that's what he said. He said he could never get through the Legend of Zelda because he's bad at action games and couldn't beat the Octoroks.
Why is he a game developer at all?
Because he couldn't play them, so he decided to make them.
That's a topic for another day. But
right. He's a good developer for our listeners. I think he's a good developer, but I'm shocked that he couldn't beat the original Zelda because of the first enemy in the game.
Yeah, and it sort of alarms me that at the helm of the Zelda series, he's taken what was an action-based series and he's turned it into more of a puzzle adventure series. He sees bosses.
I'd argue that it was a puzzle action adventure. Well, more of an.
There's action in it still, but it's certainly been significantly watered down.
No, I meant the original.
The action itself is sort of puzzle-based.
Right, exactly.
No, I meant the original game. I would say it's like action puzzle adventure.
There's some
a little
puzzles,
less puzzle.
There are some puzzles, but the weight is definitely more slanted toward action. And when I see him make comments like this about bosses and how they need to have these clear weak points and how players who can't find the clear weak points will just look them up and then be able to beat the boss, I kind of wonder whether it would be better designed to just make bosses that don't revolve around weak spots and instead revolve around skill. So, you know, if you have a game where if people just look up the answer, they can beat the game, that's not a satisfying challenge. That's a puzzle. I mean, that's something that you beat once and you remember the solution forever. Skill-based game would be more about building up your skills and getting good enough to beat the game. And maybe next time you can challenge yourself a little more and do it with weaker equipment or something. So when I hear him say stuff like this, I'm a little worried that he'll do more of a puzzle focus with the bosses in Zelda U, which, given how much they've talked about making it more like the first game, kind of has me skeptical.
I like a good blend of the two things, like the puzzle and the action, or, you know, basing it on skill versus basing it on finding a weakness. I think it's always great when you come up to a new boss and you can kind of experiment, try different weapons on them, see what effect they have, or try hitting them in different spots, or try using the environment to your advantage. And I really like that aspect of it, is just, you know, approaching it as, how can I get an advantage over this guy? But I think the problem becomes when that advantage just becomes an easy trump card, and it's, I figured out his weak spot, so now it's just press A repeatedly and then I win. And, you know, I think that's what you're talking about, where there shouldn't be a boss where you can just look it up online and then it becomes easy. I think there needs to be a good blend where even if you do find the weak spot, it gives you a clear advantage, but it doesn't just make it, you know, easier than beating Majoras with the Fierce Deity Mask. There should still be skill involved even after you locate weak spots.
Yeah, and there's a cool opportunity with the fact that they're making the next game non-linear to take, say, an item that you get later in the game, and maybe if you stumble on it earlier on, you can kick ass against a bunch of the other bosses. But that would be something that you'd have to kind of build up to, or maybe grind heart containers till you can get there, and then you can come back and that would be kind of your trump card, as opposed to these obvious trump cards that you see just based on looking at the boss.
Exactly.
Level 5 is already making 2 new Yokai Watch games. For those of you who don't know what Yokai Watch is, it's an immensely popular series in Japan. It's launching in the West, I think, later this year. The anime is, anyway. It's like 5 parts Pokemon and like 1 part Ghostbusters. And Yokai Watch 2 is split into 2 different versions, like Pokemon is. So Koro will reveal details on 2 new Yokai Watch games next month. At least one of them is probably Yokai Watch 3. That kind of depends, you know, it could be like Yokai Watch 3 red version and blue version. And And Level 5 is already working on a spin-off called Yokai Watch Busters, based on a mode from Yokai Watch 2.
Yeah, so the first Yokai Watch game, it eclipsed 1 million sales in Japan, did pretty good, and then as the anime and toy line started to pick up steam, the second one was immensely popular. That was where they launched it with 2 versions, much like Pokemon, and then they also actually released a 3rd version late last year. Again, very similar to Pokemon, how you get...
Emerald version?
Yeah, exactly. And so Yokai Watch 2, between its 3 versions, I think has broken 5 million sales now. And all 3 versions released within 6 months of each other. So this is just extremely popular. And yeah, they're planning to reveal Yokai Watch 3 soon, which that could launch with 2 versions or maybe just 1. We're not really sure. They haven't elaborated yet. And then Busters, like you said, it's a mode from the second game, and they're expanding it into its own game. So this is just becoming a major series for them. And it's honestly selling at the same level that it's selling more than Pokemon is right now. So it'll be interesting to see if it can take off in the West the way Pokemon did. We're having that TV show for kids to get up and watch, and that toy line for them to go out and get keeps them hooked on the games too.
Yeah,
and hopefully it's a good example to others that a new property backed by a multimedia franchise can do really well.
Level 5 is also working on Fantasy Life 2 and a new Professor Layton game, and they're officially revealing those projects on April 7th. Professor Layton kind of ended with, the second trilogy, right? I think they originally intended, and then now I guess they decide to make another.
They've said the next one will be very, very different from the previously established formula of the series, so.
What's the kid's name? Luke?
I'm honestly not sure. I never really played the games.
Professor Luke! I don't know if that's the kid's name, but...
I think you're right, but I never remember either.
That could be kind of cool if they do that. Luke is now the professor, and Professor Layton is some old guy, kind of giving him advice and stuff. And Luke has a new assistant. I still don't know if his name is Luke.
So what they're going to do is they're going to turn it into the Japanese Doctor Who, and every time they finish a trilogy, another doctor or professor will come in.
Well,
Professor Who?
Do we get to see the professor killed off in each game like they do the doctors, or would that be a little vital for 3DS? So, also on this presentation they're doing on April 7th, they've said they're going to reveal some sort of multimedia project, which could be tied to a game. You'd almost assume it is, since Level 5's working on it. And then also, they said they're going to reveal another game that will be a collaboration project with another company. And last year, they teased that they were working on a game that they thought would be more popular than Yokai Watch. So there should be a lot of stuff coming on this April 7th presentation.
Huh.
Pay attention.
Interesting. I wonder if they're making a multimedia series out of Professor Layton.
That's a possibility.
I feel like Professor Layton is just so ripe for an anime series. Granted, I've never played Professor Layton though, so I'm not the best source.
That is your uninformed opinion.
My completely uninformed opinion. Majora's Mask 3D topped the US sales charts in February by selling over 500,000 units. Second place was Evolve, and I really wish they would tell us the sales numbers for more than just the top and bottom game. There's not really much we can talk about here if we don't have any numbers to compare Majora's Mask to for the month.
Yeah, well, unlike Media Create, which tracks all sales in Japan, NPD, they can kind of give rough estimates, but they can only give exact numbers if the companies turn them over. So anytime they give numbers, those are coming straight from press releases from Nintendo, Microsoft, and Sony.
Well, so. Right. Which is really frustrating that the other companies don't do that. I hate
they don't
that they don't do that.
Well, they do it when they have.
I was
going to
say they don't talk about
sometimes.
anything unless
Sometimes.
it's over 1 million sales or over such and such dollars. That's how they operate when it comes to sales numbers.
Yeah. Monster Hunter 4 though placed Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate placed 10 on the list at 290,000 copies sold, which is pretty dang good for a Monster Hunter game, especially in the West. Well, really in the West. In Japan, that would be abysmal. So
that's the first hour sales.
So maybe Monster Hunter is on the uptick. Do you think that's because of the game itself, or do you think more Capcom is doing a better job marketing it and selling it in the West?
Well, I mean, these are impressive numbers, but I think right now it's too hard to tell because the timing, because it was right on the heels of the launch of the new 3DS. it's late enough in the 3DS life cycle that you have all the super fans who are already in the ecosystem buying a bunch of copies. So we won't really know if the popularity is really ticked up until we see the tail sales, which I think I've talked about this before.
Tail sales. Yeah, how they're like front loaded and
and it's happening with Nintendo too.
I think launching it alongside the new Nintendo 3DS and with the special edition and everything was obviously just the best possible way you could have launched Monster
Well,
Hunter
they also had that. Not like a marketing campaign, but they had the idea to do like the Legend of Zelda DLC and stuff, and have like this once a month free DLC. That's like really substantial DLC, which we've talked about on this podcast before. I think how it's like it's really a nice, satisfying upgrade for free for people who have it. So,
and I think the series probably is picking up some traction in North America, just because the fan base is getting more used to the platform it's on now.
Right.
Because it used to be mostly Sony exclusive, and only maybe half the games ever made it to America. But now it's been Nintendo. Not quite exclusive, but mostly on Nintendo platforms for a while now. And, we got Monster Hunter Tri, we got 3 Ultimate, now we're getting 4 Ultimate. So I think, fans in the West are getting more used to Monster Hunter games consistently coming out on the same platform. So I think the popularity is starting to grow.
And I think an underappreciated reason why this game might be doing well is that Nintendo's really been treating this game much better than it does most of its third-party games, which... in the past, you'll see third-party games in like a sizzle trailer or something. They don't really give the floor to them like they have with this game, and they've even positioned it as a major launch title for a new platform, which is like unprecedented, I would say, in America at least.
Speaking of sales, Nintendo 3DS hardware sales for the last 2 months are up 90% compared to last January through February. So this is likely in part due to the strong Majora's Mask sales we just discussed, but in much larger part to the launch of the new Nintendo 3DS XL, because this has previous 3DS owners buying new hardware. So
I think the really crazy thing about the sales numbers is that new 3DS topped the launch of the 3DS XL, even though nowadays the 3DS has already peaked and it seems like it was on the decline. So you wouldn't really expect those kinds of numbers at this point. And that's a good sign because it means that Nintendo's new 3DS strategy is really paying off, even if it's really just about getting the old owners to upgrade. There's still...
Well, I think it is a good up... I think that's because, like, people who had the original 3DS didn't really see a need to upgrade to the 3DS XL, because all it really is more expensive hardware that's bigger, that's like less convenient, and it looks nicer. It's better. I think it's a much better experience to play on. But I think a lot more people see a reason to upgrade from any old model of 3DS to the new 3DS than from the original 3DS to the 3DS XL.
Well, and let me flip back to the 3DS XL comment. I don't think the 3DS XL was as much meant as an upgrade as it was meant as a sales driver for the 3DS. So at this point, new 3DS isn't doing the job that 3DS XL is supposed to do. It's doing a completely different one, but it's doing it better than 3DS XL did at driving sales back then. So their upgrade strategy seems to be paying off, as opposed to their release a new model and try to get more people to buy.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, new Nintendo 3DS is definitely a very quality upgrade. So, I think that's obviously a huge contributing factor in why sales were so good for the first 2 months of this year. But a big part of that 90% jump is also just because 3DS sales were frankly pretty terrible last year in January and February. It was about this time that last year that Nintendo was cutting their predictions and saying, we thought we were going to get 18 million 3DSs sold, but we're only going to get 12 million now. Yeah. And they put in much weaker holiday numbers than they anticipated. I remember Iwata addressed the investors and basically said, we expected Nintendo 3DS and 2DS to be at the top of like little kids' Christmas lists, and it just kind of wasn't. Mm-hmm. So last year we saw some of the weakest sales in January and February for just any months in 3DS life, and now this year we're seeing particularly strong sales because of the new model. So that's why you got such a huge gap between last year's numbers and this year's numbers.
Right. You made a comment about how new 3DS is a good upgrade, and I think that really hits on an interesting point, which is that Nintendo's usually relied on their hardware being differentiated from past hardware. And what's really interesting this time around is that they're responding to things that people were asking for. They weren't being creative with the hardware. They were giving people what they wanted.
C-Stick particularly.
Yeah, exactly. C-Stick was like one of the most requested features. I think more stable 3D. So anyway, the fact that a quality upgrade is really getting so much traction sort of flies in the face of their usual strategy.
So, yeah, the new Nintendo 3DS, we all can pretty much agree that it has a terrible name. Reggie doesn't think so. Reggie defends its name. He says, "We think deeply about all our product names and really try and come up with a naming convention that makes sense for the consumer, that communicates what's going on. We believe that this communicates that this is an improved version of the 3DS line." My sentiment is, I don't care what you believe, Reggie. You're wrong. I've met plenty of gamers who, and even Nintendo fans, who just don't understand the difference. And if you're having trouble communicating it to your fans, you can certainly bet that it will not communicate to the wider range of your consumers.
I mean, it's better than Wii U, and it at least reiterates that this is a new, console in the 3DS family. And it has been doing pretty well, so people seem to have gotten the message.
Yeah, but does better really mean good?
No, I mean...
Better than Wii U, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, yes.
It's a pretty low
there's
bar.
That. I think the real toxic problem is that they have this obsession with continuing their brands, even when brand loyalty seems to be really shaky for them in the first place. And then on top of that, they give them weird brand extension names. So
New Nintendo 3DS XL.
Yeah, that's way too
So
cluttered.
long.
There's way too much going on there.
That would not pass my test for putting headlines on the site.
Yeah, and brand loyalty hasn't even traditionally worked that way. Even PS4 had to kind of build itself up prior to launch with things like PSN and their really awesome PS4 strategy and marketing. It wasn't just it's a new PlayStation, so it's going to do well. They had to really nail everything, including the marketing and branding.
I'll say, I think it's a terrible name, but I don't think that has to matter, because we're seeing great sales early on, and that's mostly from the really dedicated Nintendo fans who want the upgrade. And so these fans, obviously, they most of them do understand the difference between a standard 3DS and a new Nintendo 3DS, because they're the type that follow along and read websites like Amnesia, so they're up to date on that. And eventually, those sales are going to slow, though, and you're not going to get all the hardcore fans rushing in to buy it, because most of them either already have it or have decided they don't want it. And that's when you have to start branching out to, a slightly wider fan base, if that's even Nintendo's focus. So, for Nintendo to avoid that being a problem, to avoid the problem of having, someone go into GameStop and they say, I want a new 3DS, and the person has no idea if they want a new version of the old 3DS or a new 3DS.
Can I get a new Wii U XL? Deluxe?
Well, as long as Nintendo phases out the old models of 3DS and stops, manufacturing new ones and putting them on the shelves and just makes new 3DS the standard model from here on out, then I don't think it becomes a problem anymore. I think maybe having new in the name is flashy enough that kind of makes customers look and say, oh, what's new about this? And they don't really have the old one to compare it to and be confused about, because it's been phased out and you can't buy a new old 3DS anymore. But if Nintendo continues to produce, 3DS, 3DS XL, 2DS, new 3DS, and new 3DS XL, then you're just asking for confusion.
Yeah. So the Happy Mask Salesman may return in a future Zelda game. Nintendo held a mock interview with the character on Miiverse, and the fake Happy Mask Salesman said that seeing him, meaning the real Happy Mask Salesman, so it's confusing. He said that seeing the Happy Mask Salesman in a future Zelda game, quote, wouldn't be a stretch. So, Zelda U's coming out later this year. Do we think that he's going to make an appearance? Is this interview teasing that? And if he does, do you think he's going to play a major role, or do you think it's going to be more subtle, like Ocarina of Time?
I'm hoping that if he does show up in Zelda U, his role is more like it was in Ocarina of Time. And by that I mean he's not this frontline character. But I'm hoping that the masks themselves are more like Majora's Mask, where they give you special abilities, like maybe the bunny hood, it makes you run faster, or the stone mask makes you hard to detect. Because I thought that system was really cool, but I don't think he should be a main character again.
Is there a particular reason behind that?
It's just nice to see new characters and new stories, and
I feel that
it's a cool system, so it deserves to be used again in some way. But that doesn't mean that the story behind it has to be reused too.
One thing I could see Nintendo doing is sort of throwing in some connections to Majora's Mask and Zelda U. we saw Ocarina of Time 3D launch on 3DS back in 2011, and then Skyward Sword came out later that year and sort of served as a prequel story to that. So you got the origins of, like, Zelda and Impa and even Ganon to an extent. And I don't imagine we'd see anything that fleshed out just because Majora's Mask is really based around mystery, so revealing too many origins would kind of ruin that. But I could see them having Happy Mask Salesman and maybe some other little cameos just to sort of, you know, as a bonus for people that just bought Majora's Mask 3D earlier that year. Especially if new fans, you know, Majora's Mask 3D, you know, introduce them to the series, and then it's like, oh, hey, you know, here's something from that game I bought earlier.
Well, Zelda's also no stranger to characters reappearing in canon games, but in, like, you know, not in the same role. Like Dompe has been in, like, a bunch of games. You know, Impa, amazing
toilet hand guy.
The toilet hand guy. So yeah. So an indie record label based in New York is on Kickstarter seeking funds for a Western release of the official Mother soundtrack. So the official Mother soundtrack isn't just like the music ripped from the game. Mother, by the way, for those who don't know, it's the prequel to Earthbound. Earthbound is technically, it's Mother 2 in Japan, but Mother wasn't released in America. So the Mother soundtrack has a lot of familiar stuff like 8 melodies. It's got a song called Bein' Friends, which that's the song that plays in Onet and Smash Bros. It's like da 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 da. I'll just play it in the podcast. I won't sound like an idiot that way.
No, please sing the whole thing.
So it's got a ton of familiar songs. It's basically like a beta version of the Earthbound soundtrack, almost. But what the official soundtrack was a studio recorded album. Like, it's got some orchestrated tracks. It's got some really, really great vocalists singing lyrical versions of these songs. It's a really amazing album. You can find it on YouTube already because people have uploaded it from Japan because it's been out there since like 1989. But he's on Kickstarter seeking funding for a Western release. And the project was actually fully funded recently.
Woo!
So yeah, if you're interested in that, go ahead and check it out. So Nintendo is banning Club Nintendo members who exploited that Wii Mini Glitch on the Club Nintendo system. For a while, there was this glitch where you could type in like the first 4 numbers or something of a Wii Mini serial code, and then if you just entered a bunch of just random digits after that, it would give you like a legitimate code for Wii Mini, and it would register the Wii Mini on your account as a console. It would give you coins and stuff, and then you could use those coins to get rewards. Nintendo is now banning Club Nintendo members who did that. I feel like it's kind of a bad time to do that because Club Nintendo's dead anyway.
Too late.
You know, I bet the way they figured out who was exploiting it is just they banned everyone who claimed to own a Wii Mini because they know no one actually owns that thing.
Anyway, so Codename Steam came out last Friday, and it's looking like the reviews are pretty good. It's getting mostly 7s and 8s. Polygon and GameSpot gave it pretty low scores, but the general consensus seems to be that it's a great start for a new IP from Nintendo, both gameplay-wise and in terms of the characters and the world it's set in.
Do you think we'll see this expanded into a series?
I mean, I think so. Nintendo serializes everything they do. The only game I can think of that Nintendo's ever released in the last like 2 or 3 console generations is Harmonite, which is like, come on. Yeah. Dylan's Rolling Western had a sequel. Pushmo had 2 sequels. Well, Codename Steam's got to get a sequel at some point. But at least personally, I think like the world it's set in, you know, the steampunk aesthetic, the whole comic book vibe, I think it's really cool. I don't particularly think the gameplay's that great. I think there are a lot of things that people are complaining about that I think are totally valid, that do drag the game down. But all in all, I would love to see, you know, a Codename Steam 2 that addresses issues from its predecessor and really makes it into a really fluid, really good, great experience, because I do think it's a great series to add to Nintendo's repertoire.
Do you want to turn the Steam into fluid?
Oh my god.
Given the way they used Amiibo in this game, I could see them expanding on the Amiibo concept for a future game, because it's already a team of like crossover freaking superheroes anyway. You might as well bring Nintendo heroes into the mix.
Yeah, that's true. You got like you've got like the entire cast of Wizard of Oz.
Right, precisely.
Minus, like the witch. You got Abe Lincoln, you've got like John Henry, so yeah.
And yeah. A lot of Nintendo characters were really popular in America too, so it fits the theme well.
Right. Well, I feel like you could easily add not so much characters like Martha and Lucina and stuff, because there is very much an American folklore theme behind which characters they chose to be playable in Codename Steam. You know, it's Abe Lincoln. It's an African American folk hero. It's, you know, you've got Henry Fleming from the Red Badge of Courage. So it's really an American vibe, and in that sense, I could totally see them adding like Little Mac, like Captain Falcon.
Even Mario.
To
Mario is supposed to be from America.
Mario,
Donkey Kong is very
Isn't
King Kong-esque.
I thought Mario's Italian.
I thought Mario was from the Mushroom Kingdom.
No, he's from Brooklyn.
Two
Come
totally
on,
different answers
Brooklyn.
there.
That's true.
I thought that was just the show, though.
No, that was in the instruction manuals.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Really?
I'm pretty sure.
What? That's crazy.
Yeah, well,
Okay,
isn't the original 1983 Mario? Isn't that supposed to be like in the sewers?
It's a melting pot.
Yeah, and he's Italian, so I
am I
mean,
just
he's an
completely
Italian
wrong?
American.
Okay. I completely agree with you, though. Yeah. Meanwhile, though, Mario Party 10, it's not out yet. It comes out this Friday. But Mario Party 10 the reviews have been rolling in, and they are not looking good. The general consensus on that is it's boring, it's lame, the whole car mechanic is just a fundamentally bad idea. It makes things too predictable, too repetitive, too dull. But meanwhile, the asymmetrical gameplay on the Bowser mode is like a really good idea, a great new addition, but there aren't enough minigames to keep it really interesting, and the player who's Bowser has way too much power. Like, they can roll 4 die at once, and no matter how many players are going against them,
that's nuts.
in like the car. Yeah, it's crazy. Meanwhile, the Amiibo Party is like a great callback to the original Mario Party, but the boards are just squares with no diverging paths, and it just looks like it's just all. Also, you have in the Amiibo mode, you have to scan your Amiibo at every turn.
Oh,
Not
that's
just at the
gross.
beginning to get the board game. Yeah. Game Explained called it, and I think this is a really good quote, an exercise in tedium. The point, like as if the point of the game is just to be tedious. It really sounds like there are just some major issues with Mario Party 10.
And it's a shame, given that
Yeah.
Nintendo should at least be able to make games that don't have glaring issues.
Yeah, for real.
They're Nintendo.
They've made it clear that Mario Party series is the exception to the rule. For the last few years anyway.
Yeah, sure enough.
So, and as always, to conclude the news segment of this week's show, we're bringing you a lightning round with little nuggets of information. So there's some upcoming dates to look out for. Like I said, March 20th is when Mario Party 10 comes out alongside the Super Mario series of Amiibo and the Gold Mario Amiibo. April 7th, again, is when Level 5 will be revealing Yokai Watch 3, Fantasy Life 2, and a new Professor Layton, alongside, Ben, you said some, like, other new stuff?
A collaboration project and a multimedia venture of some sort.
And the fourth wave of Super Smash Bros. Amiibo launches on April 20th in Oceania, so we can expect a release date around the same time in the Americas as well. And a few general facts from last week and some reminders for you. Star Fox fans are working on making Dinosaur Planet, the Rareware game that eventually became Star Fox Adventures, into an animated series. So that's pretty cool. You can check that out if you want. If you have a smaller model new 3DS, you can get blank faceplates from Etsy to make your own custom designs, I think that's really cool. If we had them in America, I would love doing that. We have some gorgeous, colorful new artwork from Splatoon, as well as some more new footage and artwork from Xenoblade Chronicles X. We also have new artwork, screenshots, and a developer stream from Bravely Second. 2 engineers from Netflix have made a version of Netflix that runs on the NES. It's totally nuts. It looks really bad, but it's really cool to see.
We have the technology.
The future is now. We can watch TV on our Nintendo Entertainment System. Hyrule Warriors Boss Pack DLC is now available, so if you want to play as Ganon or a giant Cucco, you can download it today. And someone has figured out a way to exploit Street Pass and have your plaza visited by the same Special Me unlimited times. Once again, you can head to Gamnesia to learn all about it, all about any of these things we just discussed in the lightning round. Alright guys, so after the break we will be back to discuss Nintendo's smartphone plans and their new system codenamed NX. There's a megaton of information here, so we're going to be breaking down the news, the reactions, what it means for Nintendo, and after that we're going to be answering your questions. We asked fans at Gamnesia to ask anything and everything about Nintendo, and boy did you guys deliver. All that coming up and more, so do stay tuned.